right, here we go. All right, Miss Mandy. First off, thank you for doing this. We've crossed paths last year a little bit, and we've been talking and in connection ever since. So I'm super excited to have you back on here for this summit. So, for anybody who maybe hasn't heard about you or anything like that, if you want to tell us a little bit about you, a little bit of background, and then we can kind of dive into it.
Yes. Thank you again for having me. Always a pleasure. So you guys are going to get to know me, but I am from Canada, Southwestern Ontario to be specific. I work a full time job, which is 40 hours a week, while being an author on the side. So, what started me with authorship as a kid, like wanting to write stories, was I love to escape in sci fi. My life was not the greatest. There's bullying and some family drama, and that was my way of escaping the torment, so to speak. So sci-fi has always been my first love. And now, as I grow up, I'm self-taught, like learning from articles and YouTubes and summits and anything I can get my hands on, because schooling didn't really teach me much about writing. They teach you how to study other people's work and do essays and answer questions, but they don't actually teach you things like, plot structure or character development or theme or any of that stuff that's actually creative writing. So, yeah.
Yep, that makes sense. I always say the only thing school is good for is putting you in debt because I didn't get anything from school that was applicable to the real world. But yeah, you're so right. When it comes to writing, like I think this is the way for most people, especially in self-publishing, is it's pretty self-taught. Now you make connections and you learn from, like, you can't do it yourself, but like you said, you're studying. I know from talking to you in the past, like you're always like, oh, I got this book on this and I'm reading it, and then this book over here about this, and like you always got to be a student to be able to not only learn how to get started, but then continually develop your craft, right? Um, and then you mentioned how you're still working, 40 hours a week, like full-time job, as you're getting your writing going and stuff like that, which is the topic of this conversation. So I'm just curious, for a lot of people out there probably listening and watching who are probably still working a full-time job and are either dipping their toe into becoming an author for the first time, or maybe they've started and they're still continuing through that journey to try to get published for the first time. I'm just curious, for somebody like you, 40 hours a week while trying to do this, how do you balance that kind of time management to make sure you're staying on track, especially with your authoring?
So, time management for me is being aware of certain things. So, for example, um, what time of the day do I work? Make sure to get lots of sleep because you do not want to be exhausted. I don't know about anyone else, but I like my 10 hours of sleep right now. Um, so when I'm writing or anything else that's writing related, because my job takes a lot of mental pull, I should say. Like I can get really tired after working on lots of problem solving and customer service and all this stuff. I don't have the energy at the end of the day. So I had to evaluate how much energy am I spending on my job, which I get paid for and pays my bills. And then if that's taking up too much energy and I don't have enough energy after work and all I want to do is veg out or read a book or make a meal, then I have to prioritize writing before I work, because that's the time of day where I have the energy and I can dedicate it. So if I work at 10 a.m., I wake up at 8. I get myself ready and I spend half an hour, 45 minutes or more writing. Uh, I do try to challenge myself to write every day, although there are some days where I'll take a break and I'll do my email newsletter, which obviously is very important for an author. So mornings I find work the best because then you can, even though it's, early and you're not necessarily fully awake, depending on how much coffee you have and unless you inject it. Um, I find that if you do it in the morning, you're not so drained and you can actually get stuff done. Um, when I was writing my first draft for one of my books, I was able to be consistent with word count and get in 30,000 words in a month by doing that. So it's not like it's not impossible, but I am finding now that I'm in the editing stage that it takes a lot longer, and I've never had to edit a full novel. So I'm like learning by the seat of my pants, but that is hand in hand with, self-taught and learning and stuff like that. But when it comes to time management, you got to just, you can do blockouts. Like I think Elon Musk does that. He blocks out certain amounts of time and he dedicates, 3 hours here, 1 hour here, 2 hours there, and he gives himself chunks to get all his tasks done. Apparently, it's highly effective. I've never done it myself, but it's kind of similar to what I'm already doing. I chunk out the morning to do my writing. I work. I do my personal stuff.
Yeah, I think the blockout, I've heard that. It makes sense that Elon would do that because he's obviously hyper successful and does 1,000 different things in a day, I'm sure. But I've actually studied and learned this from a lot of other very high achieving like entrepreneurs and business people. Is there's not a to-do list. It's blocked out. They know every single hour of every single day what they're doing in those certain times because they know certain tasks need to be done either first or they some tasks need more time than other tasks and stuff like that. So I think when it comes to writing, you're right. It's like if you can find a time, whether it's early in the morning, during the day, or in the evening, depending on the person's schedule, how well you work, finding that time to block out and trying to stay as consistent as possible, I think is really important. Me and you have had this conversation for a long,
Yeah.
a long time, kind of ongoing, but it's like, if you set a, like a, let's say you set a word count for yourself, I'm going to hit 500 words a day and I'm going to try to hit that 5 days a week or 7 days a week or however many days. But it's like, there are going to be days where you might not get 500, but it's about staying consistent, not just maybe with the time that you're writing, but just staying in the craft and just, even if you know you're not going to get that word count that day, if you just get 100 or 200, those add up over time. If you had 10 days a month where you didn't hit your goal, but you were still writing, like that adds up versus you took all those days off and now you're, 1,500, 2,000 words behind where you could have been. But yeah, I think definitely that was a great point. Having time that's blocked out, knowing like this is when I'm writing, especially when I have a job and I know work's about to come up and it's going to kick my butt mentally and sometimes physically. I need to be at the sharpest that I can when it comes to being creative. So yeah, I think that's a good point, especially hopefully trying to get it knocked out in the morning for sure.
And you and I had already talked about this. If, say, for example, I don't have kids, you do, but I mean, like, if you have a family and a lot of your time is taken up, there's small little increments throughout the day. I want to remember who it was. He's author Level Up on YouTube. He talked about how when he's standing in line at the grocery store, when he's waiting at the dentist, he'd pull out his phone and he'd type on his phone his word count. He can squeeze it in. So there's different methods. You just got to find what works for you.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think there's not a one size fits all, because everybody's different. Like, I know I work best early mornings before my kids wake up and begin to terrorize me. I know some people prefer late at night. Like maybe they sleep in, they don't have kids waking them up. I don't know where they are in their life, but then like they work better writing later in the evenings. Like, and then like you said, maybe you have to squeeze it in these little like micro sessions throughout the day. That way you're staying consistent. You're trying to get your word count. Because if your book's going to be, let's say, 60 to 100,000 words, like every day that you don't write something is a day you're behind. That your book's not going to be done. And like you mentioned at the beginning, now you're like in the editing phase for the first time. It's like that takes a
Editing
lot of
takes
time.
longer.
It takes a long because it's a different mindset. Your mindset shift it's a lot different than just sitting down and banging words out. Like now we're looking meticulously at each sentence and each paragraph and each chapter, and it's exhausting and it takes a lot of time.
I think what you're pointing out is like when you want to get down to like grammar or say for pacing. Like I have portions in my manuscript where I wrote a scene that should be longer drawn out, but it's paced like an action. And then there are scenes that are vice versa. And it wasn't until an alpha reader, because it's not finalized yet, an alpha reader read the and said the pacing's off. You have to, chunk up these paragraphs instead of being so long because it's an action sequence or whatever. So I mean, you're talking about, grammar and structure and things like that. I mean, if you can get 10 pages a day, you're still making progress. And like you'll have to make multiple passes. So, I mean, just it's the same thing as writing. Instead of a word count, you're just doing a page count.
Yeah, it's definitely going to take you more than one work through, right? Like, it's rare you're going to write your first draft, edit your first draft all at once, and it's going to be perfect. It takes time and it takes, effort, which is super important. Now, this was something we were talking about a little bit off camera before we started recording. Is you know, I think this is natural for just human behavior, but our tendency to want to compare ourselves to others when it comes to our writing, or maybe how fast we're writing, or how quickly we get a book done and stuff like that. For somebody like you, how do you, is that an issue for you? And if so, like, how do you try to offset that mentality when you find yourself, maybe beating yourself up a little bit because you see this person's writing 2,000 words a day, but you're only getting 500 or something like that?
I think also when somebody says, I write 2,000 words a day and it's someone else, you don't get the full context. How much time do they have to write? Are they a full time author? Have they had more experience writing multiple books? I'm on my first book, so that wouldn't make sense. That'd be like comparing a really old Mustang to an eco diesel Ford F-150. It just doesn't make sense. It's not. It's got to be apples to apples. So um, I think also, I think I mentioned this author's secret sauce was where I learned from one of their introduction videos that there's actually different, um, it's not so much levels as it is different stages in your authorship. I am a part time author. I like writing part time because I am not full time yet. I don't have enough books under my shelf. I don't have another income from authorship coming in. I have to work, but I want to transition. So I'm working towards authorship while working a full time job. But that's not like some of these full time authors like Stephen King or um, James S.A. Corey or whatever. Like these authors have a whole slew, like dozens and dozens of books under their belt. Was it James Patterson's another one? They have a whole backlist that can support them, so they can spend all that time writing. I don't have that, so I'm at a different stage than they are. So to compare it, you have to compare apples to apples, and there are different stages in your authorship career. So
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's like Stephen King and James Patterson, they've been writing for decades, right? Like, I bet they've probably been writing longer than I've been alive. I'm 32. I imagine they started a long, long time ago. So it's like, and James Patterson seems to put out a book every week, but he's now at the point in his career where he's like, it seems like 90% of his books he's co-authoring with people. So he's even got the luxury now where he doesn't have to sit down himself and write every single book himself, because he's just obviously gotten to that point. He makes crazy amounts of money from his authoring. But you're right, he's been at it for so long. And there's that consistency where everybody starts at the same spot. So they were where we were at, where you were at, where they sat down and wrote their first word, their first page, their first chapter, and eventually their first book. And then they just kept going. Um, but I think it's consistency and persistence is where it really becomes important for an author. And then avoiding that comparison game. And then if you do compare yourself or you feel that tug, I think your point makes a lot of sense. Is like, well, look at the person you're comparing yourself to, and it's like, where are they? How long have they been here? Like, it wouldn't make sense for a brand new entrepreneur to compare themselves to Elon Musk, who's started PayPal and Tesla and SpaceX. The guy's been doing it for decades. Like, there's no comparison at all. That could be where you want to get to, right? Like, that's a great aspiration. But to compare yourself to that person now, to me, only has negative effects. So I think that
yes.
point you made is really good, especially when it comes to being a first time author and working towards publishing your first book, which is always an exciting but nervous, nerve wracking journey, right?
Yeah, and if it's your first book, I know I'm also speaking to myself, but take your time because it's better. Like, I know you want to publish on a timely fashion and not put it off and be such a procrastinator or just like an over perfectionist. But at the same time, like, there are different authors that take different amounts of time when it comes to each book or even the first. And it's only when you have accomplished the first book, then you get the experience to make it streamlined for the second book and so on and so forth. But when it comes to your first book, don't push yourself so hard because you're still learning the craft and practicing and putting in and getting the habit and putting into practice, and that takes time. I mean, it's kind of like learning to ride a bike. You don't get the training pedals off right away.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's not like, you know, your first book is where you're going to be the full-time author making lots of money. It's like the process is starting and getting that first book out, the second, the third, the fifth, whatever it is. But then once you get the catalog built up and you have that backlist, the point is to get read through and have enough books out there where that is where money can really start to be made. Obviously, there's 1,000 other factors that go into it. You can't just write 10 books and say, oh, I'm going to make a ton of money. Like, there's still other things that need to be done correctly along the way and all that stuff. But yeah, I like that. Don't rush your first book. I rushed mine. Um, like I thought I was like, I have to write it as fast as I can, publish it as fast as I can. And then it was like, I didn't realize all these other things that go in hand with the publishing and writing process. And then I was playing catch up after my book was published and nobody knew it was out there. And it was just sitting out there in the Amazon, wilderness online. It's like, then I had to do all these things that I should have been working on during my writing publishing process before it ever went live. Um, and so, yeah, I think that's a great point. Don't rush it. You'll learn, and then as you learn and do it more, you're going to get faster anyways, right? Just by default, in my opinion. You might still be a slow writer in comparison to maybe other people, but the more you do it and the more practice you put in and more reps you get, it becomes easier and the process should become faster, right?
I also think that you gave an opportunity that, with your experience and what you went through, that emphasizes why it's important to get uh, a peer-to-peer group or a coach, because one, coaching with the experience is a way to offset just the authorship income because it's in demand and it helps other authors navigate the world of authorship. And there's also the fact that, with the way you just explained about how your first book came out, if you had a coach, it would have been totally different and you might have had a bigger success the first time around. So um, I think that if you surround yourself with other writers, they'll be able to nudge you in the right direction.
I agree. I think, especially when we're talking self-publishing, not everybody wants to go the self-publishing route, but it's getting more and more popular as the years go on because the quality of work coming out with self-published authors is increasing all the time, and they're starting to basically be neck and neck with traditionally published authors. Just because you're self-published, I think there's still this stigma that means like, oh, you're not a real author. I mean, all that has changed. Maybe that was like it was when it first came out, but I mean, I don't see the difference now. You just don't have a big, publishing house backing you. But yeah, you're right. Community, having a community of other like-minded people in your space is huge. It cannot be overemphasized enough. And I think it's a step or an aspect of the process that a lot of people skip over or don't really understand. So yeah, you're 100% right with that.
I also notice that when I'm reading some of these writing books, they're like, oh, well, self-published authors only sell 150 books in their lifetime. That's going to change, because if the quality's going up, the only thing we need to do is work on things like marketing, like Derek Doker's The Aspire Method is a great way to start with that. If we knew about, starting an email list, things that coaches would help with, or peers. Like, if somebody doesn't know about an email list and I'm on these Facebook groups, I tell them because they don't know what they're missing. When you have an email list, you have a ready audience for when your book comes out. Can I
100%.
emphasize that?
Yeah, you can. And I'm obviously email marketing and list building is like what I do for people. Like that's my coaching expertise area. And like I tell everybody, I'm like, I don't care if you're just getting started with writing a book or you've got 10 books out. If you don't have an email list, you're doing yourself a disservice because this is where you connect with people on a deeper level. I'm not talking social media. I'm not a big social media person. Email list is where you control what you say, when you say it. And to me, it's where you develop these really deep and lasting relationships with these people, like your readers, where that'll pay dividends down the road as long as they stay with you and you're creating engagement and you're authentic and honest and transparent, stuff like that. I don't see a better place for it, like you said, than obviously having an email list.
Yeah. And it is the E in the Aspire Method by
That's right.
Derek
Yeah. Thanks,
Dover.
Derek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're doing a Derek Delker
shout
little
out to Mr. Defker. That's
promo
right.
here. Wink,
Yeah,
wink.
the legend. He's the
Um,
man.
Now you said you're good on email marketing. I am actually already started on Instagram. And although it took a learning curve, I'm now just focusing on making it Bookstagram because I just love books. And somebody else already had the success where they had a Bookstagram, and then when their book came out, they had an audience. So I'm just trying to like, with all the stuff that you and I learn from all these amazing indie authors and whatever, trying to find a way to get them on the email list because that is ultimately the goal. But yeah, um, Instagram is a great way to start a community because say it's just like your love of books. If you go out and intentionally start commenting and creating conversations with people on social media, like Instagram, I have experience with that, so I'll just speak to that. And there's a conversation that actually goes back and forth, and you follow each other and you comment and you ask questions, and eventually you hope that they'll have an interest in your book. Not that that's the end goal. You just want to create a community.
Yeah, the end goal is obviously as authors, we want to sell books and make a living and stuff like that. But to me, it's really about making connections with people because then kind of the after effect of that is them wanting to buy your book and the next one and the next one and wanting to tell people about it. I mean, word of mouth is still probably the most powerful form of marketing. And if you don't have a community that you've built up that you own, like there's no word of mouth to be passed around, right? So it's like you can't do what I do and just say I'm going to publish my book and then the rest takes care of itself. It's not how I don't think it's how it's ever worked, and it'll never be how it works. You actually have to put the effort in on the marketing side, which can be difficult, but I think it's super important wherever you
It's
get
important
started.
and it is attainable.
Yeah,
And I noticed too that even now with like compare indie to traditional publishing, one, it's almost becoming to the point where traditional publishers want you to have the same skill set as an indie publisher because they're not necessarily going to market it. They're not necessarily going to give you the best book cover. Well, they'll to probably take care of the book cover. I actually should probably refer to the editing. They probably want you to pay for a professional editor before it hits their desk, and then they might tweak it a little bit. But it's almost like they want to just so that they can. It's an investment. Like it's almost like they're taking out. It's kind of like when, and it's a little bit off topic, but you'll see the similarity momentarily. When George Lucas talks about Star Wars and how Disney changed how they developed the film, um, George was very adamant. It's an art. New businesses, whether it's film or traditional publishing, it's almost like they just care about the business and the money aspect. They don't really care about the fact that it's an art anymore. But then they expect the authors, whether it's traditional, like for traditional publishing, to have the same skill set as indie. But indie, you actually get more benefit because you get more of the revenue.
well
You
that
don't get the
and
distribution unless you pay for it, but you do get more of the revenue.
yeah, and you have your full creative control. If you were to sign with
Yes.
a publishing company, like they can decide to change anything they want. You have zero control. Basically, you're giving up creative control for maybe like an upfront fee, and then a certain amount of sales, which is a very, very, very small portion for what they're getting in return. But they still actually rely on the author to do a lot of the work in the marketing aspect. And I've heard from people who were like, I used to be traditionally published, and then like just horror stories you hear about these people. Like I got this big upfront fee, and then they expected me to market it, and like I basically left them high and dry. It's like where if you're like an indie publisher, being a self-published author, like you're gonna have to learn all this stuff anyways, and that becomes a skill set that's gonna transfer from book to book, and you're only gonna get better at it. And if you stick with it, theoretically, your success should be increasing as you continue on that journey, right?
Yeah, and you are mentioning about the skill set improving for your future books. That's fantastic. But supplementing your income with selling or sharing that information with other people by either coaching or webinars, that is another way of supplementing your income if authorship by itself is not doing it.
Yeah, it's definitely a long game in my opinion. I always tell people like if you can take away and quit looking at it as a sprint and look at it as more of like a marathon. Like, yes, it can be frustrating because you're working all this time and writing all these books and putting in all this effort and not seeing the return that you want. But like, it's a long game. It's a marathon. You have to just keep putting the reps in. And eventually, if you do not stop, I truly believe this in just about any aspect in life, as long as you're consistent and you don't stop, eventually something good is going to happen. It's where people get beat down and feel defeated and they give up, and maybe they don't know they could have been one book away from making it big and everything changing, right? But they stopped early because it's tough. It is. It can be defeating and make you feel, like it's not worth it. But I think, especially for somebody like you who's working on getting your first book published, you wrote a reader magnet, working on your email list, but you're also still working 40 hours a week. Like, it's basically like you've got two jobs now and you've had to learn how to supplement the two, where it's like, I know I got this time I'm working, I have to focus on that, but I also know this is what I really want in life, so I'm still putting the effort and time here, and I just make it work however it works for my schedule, which is not easy. But like I said, I've known you for over a year and a half now, and you've just been going at it every day, and I haven't seen you kind of fault yet, which is awesome to see.
Thank you. I think also I want to share is again with indie authorship, it seems like it's a huge amount of information you have to learn and apply and get really good at, and it can be overwhelming. Take everything and break it down into little chunks and even smaller chunks to those so that it's more manageable, because you don't want to get overwhelmed and just quit. You want to give yourself the opportunity. So break it down and just focus on the small parts. Oh, I can, it's like Derek talked about, oh, I can write a sentence. I can write 5 sentences. I can write a paragraph. I can write a page. And as soon as you get that momentum going, it keeps going. And then next thing you know, you got 2,000 words a day.
That's right. I mean, what's the quote? It's like, even the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, right? Like, you just have to
Yeah.
take that first step and then the next step. And I mean, it sounds so cliche and so simply put because it's not easy, right? It's simple, it's not easy. Um, but yeah, I agree with that. That's a great way to put that, especially in terms of writing. You can write a word, you can write a sentence, you can write a paragraph, you can write a page, and before you know it, boom, your book. And you're like, you look down like, holy crap, I wrote a book.
Yep.
Obviously, it's not that easy, but like it in theory, it is. You just got to put in the reps and just keep going, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's all the questions I have. Do you have anything else to add, in terms of, working full time while you're still trying to write, time management, comparison, like anything like that before we hop off here?
Um, I know that from experience for being self taught, the first book or article or webinar that you see is not necessarily going to explain it in a way that you can grasp it. There are two different things. One, you may have to read multiple different sources or articles or books on the same topic before it just clicks. And the other one, for me, I noticed this personally. I don't do something unless somebody says it multiple times. Say, like, intermittent fasting or exercise or whatever, things that are just like, I don't really want to do that. If I have physically other people speaking into my life, not just as some random audience, speaking in my life and telling me, you got to do this, you got to do this, and it's from multiple sources, oh, okay, okay, I got it. I think I can handle this now. It feels like I need positive reinforcement, and that might come in part because my love language is words of affirmation, but that's just kind of how it works. So if you know more about how you work, you can find ways to leverage that to get where you want to be.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think if enough people are telling you the same thing, it's like, might be time to start paying attention, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's awesome.
Generalist.
Yeah, that's right. No doubt. Yeah. Well, Miss Mandy, thank you so much for doing this again. It's always nice talking to you, and hopefully Canada's treating you well up there in the north.
Oh, it
So,
is.
yeah.
Nice hot weather. Thank the
All right.
Lord.
Awesome. Well, that's all I got. So I appreciate your time and, taking your time out of your day to be here. And thank you to everybody who's watching or listening, however you decide to take in this information. Hopefully you found something useful. I did. I always do, talking to people, always something in there that I can apply to myself. So I appreciate it. And we will see you guys in the next one. Thanks, Mandy.